Hey screen printers, it's Ryan here with Ryonet. In this screen printing instructional video, we're going to show you the ins and outs of printing on polyester and performance fabric with our new Wilflex Top Score ink. Printing on polyester can be difficult for a few reasons. First, the material. Polyester is meant to be moisture wicking. This means it also absorbs ink more than a cotton garment. Under heat, the polymer pores open up and release any dye in them into the environment. As you can see, this standard cotton white ink printed on a poly shirt quickly turns gray when heated to curing temperatures. Without the proper methods and inks, you can waste hundreds of dollars trying to print polyester in hours of time. In this instructional video, we're going to show you the best practices for printing polyester using the best ink in the industry and showing you that printing polyester doesn't really have to be that difficult. Generally, the lower cost to your poly garment, the more variables you run into. Next, let's take a look at the ink. Traditionally, the way to avoid dye migration is to put ink blocking capabilities into the ink directly. While this does work, it does make the ink a little thicker, and there still have been known to be dye migration issues. Low bleed inks are very common and often used for 50-50 garments. For a 100% polyester garment like this one, we recommend a true poly ink. There are two examples of poly ink: a thicker and more traditional poly ink from Wilflex, Poly White, a new form of lower cure performance ink called Top Score from Wilflex. For this video, we're going to make our print easier and going for a higher performance by using Top Score for our ink. Because a poly garment does receive more ink, we typically recommend printing on a lower mesh. For this one, we're using a 110 mesh for the underbase, but you can go as low as 86 and as high as 230 for detail. For this print, we're using standard aluminum static frames, 110 mesh for the underbase, and 156 mesh for the overprint. The frames are newer and come in at about 25 newtons, which is important for a good ink transfer and the screen mesh release when printing poly. Lower tension is not recommended for these types of prints. On press, you can see our off contact is set to about 1/8 inch, which is slightly higher than a typical t-shirt, but not too high, allowing for a good ink release between the garment and the screen. I am using a 70 durometer squeegee, and I'll be pulling the squeegee. As I lay down the underbase, I first flood the mesh. Then you can see that I pull the squeegee with a lower angle and good pressure to the print. The first pass is very important. Too high of angle and not the right pressure will not let enough ink down and not give you a smooth underbase. Too much angle will put too much ink down and not release from the screen. Once printed, you should not see any ink in your mesh and see a smooth print below. With a good technique, sometimes you can accomplish this with one pass, but typically I find two passes work a little bit better. Next, we flash our underbase. Keep in mind this is a low cure ink, so the ink also flashes at a lower temperature. For this reason, I'm turning the flash down slightly and raising it up, and using a temp gun to ensure I'm not overcuring. Once the ink reaches about 190 to 210 on the surface, I can test it with my finger to ensure it's flashed. It should feel tacky but not wet. Once I've confirmed this, it's time to lay the next layer down. Because this is a dark garment, we're going to lay more than one layer of white before doing the overprint. For the second layer, I'm going to use one pass. Then a quick flash, which goes a little bit faster this time because the garment is already slightly warm. For the overprint, our off contact is still very important. However, since we're not going directly into the fabric and we're printing on top of ink, we're using a slightly higher 156 mesh screen. We want our angle to be slightly higher and use a little less pressure than the initial underbase print. You're printing on top of an ink surface. You should think about laying the ink on top versus matting it down into the fibers. Once the print is finished, you can see how flat and bright it looks. The best way to cure this ink is with a convection, gas, or electric dryer. This maintains consistent heat of 290 degrees through the chamber and bakes the ink thoroughly. When using an IR dryer, you still have to cure at 290 degrees, but sometimes this means the surface of the ink will be 10 degrees hotter by using a temp gun. The base of that print needs to reach 290 degrees to fully set. You'll also want to avoid getting over 315 or 320 to avoid any dye migration. A more advanced donut probe will help dial in your dryer and more accurately temp the environment and cure. Curing poly means walking a thin line and having good tools is very important. If you're only using a flash dryer, the same rules do apply. Ensure the heat can penetrate through the fabric, and use a temp gun to ensure a full cure. It's always a great idea to let your garment sit for 24 to 48 hours to ensure that no dye migration occurs. Also, doing a wash test to ensure a proper cure and that no dye migration happens is always recommended. If you're having problems with continued dye migration for extra difficult garments or want to go the extra mile in preventing dye migration, you can also add a barrier base to print on top of. Wilflex Performance Underblocker Gray is specially formulated with blocking carbon properties that mitigates dye migration most effectively. This would be printed also on a lower mesh like a 110. Yes, it does add additional screens, but it also gives you the best protection. We hope this video has helped you learn some of the products and processes to help you dial in polyester printing. You can find all the supplies that we use along with our new line of Wilflex's Top Score Performance ink available at screenprinting.com. Thanks a lot for watching, screen printers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more great screen printing videos.